And thank you to Rutgers Global for hosting and opening up this really important discussion about leveraging lessons learned from the emergency response to really build sustainable solutions for displaced students and scholars and access to higher ed. We've heard about the vast global displacement and the efforts, both global and federal level, to respond to humanitarian crisis. But now I have the honor of introducing and moderating this panel of experts and change makers who are really dedicated to promoting access to higher education for displaced students and scholars. Through this discussion, we're going to highlight the needs they see as well as their approaches to promoting access. So we are going to do very abbreviated, if non-existent bios to get really right into the heart of the discussion. And so to kick us off today, we have Suzanne Lou Hedberg, who is Acting Program Officer at Open Society Foundation. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thanks so much, Laura. So I just go ahead. Yeah. Okay. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Suzanne Lou Hedberg, and I lead a portfolio at Open Society Foundations at the intersection of migration and higher education, and more granularly, welcoming and inclusion. And so, I just want to take the opportunity right now to thank everyone at Rutgers Global, fellow panelists, and everyone in this audience for having me here to speak. And it's great to see so many familiar names and faces on this call. So OSF has supported migration and education initiatives and partners since 1979 with scholarships to Black students in South Africa during apartheid. In more recent years, OSF has supported partners and initiatives focusing on refugee sponsorship, welcoming, advancing pro-immigrant rights, and equitable access to higher education. And you've all gotten a little bit of an intro into Open Society University Network, so I won't speak too much about that. But in particular, since, late August, the small little team at OSF has been really quite interested by the responses and mobilization of universities and colleges to Afghan and Ukrainian refugees. What Rosanna and Adam both had shared in the previous panel. And, how many of you have worked so tirelessly to evacuate, sponsor, and host not only refugee students and scholars, but also families as well. And so, in all the conversations that I've had with you, resource mobilization or funding is always top of mind, right? It is key to build capacity and infrastructure to keep these new or adapted programs running into the longer term. So I'll touch on that and provide a few examples of some of the models that I've seen around leveraging private funds and your own resources that you may already have to minimize or alleviate costs and burdens. But before that, I will begin with a very frank admission that there is really no ready list of private funding resources that I've seen that you can apply to so readily, right? But what you can do is start developing relationships with, local and national funders, foundations, keeping them abreast of your work. You can find a list of these funders through Chronicles of Philanthropy or Council on Foundations. And I'm sure that, in conversation with, your colleagues and networks, you're able to think through some other ones too. And of course, in more recent months, we've seen that opportunities do arise for some of these funding opportunities, right? So, for example, OSF has supported public-private partnerships around Welcoming America with Hello Neighbor, the Schwartz Foundation, as well as Welcome Fund launched by the Welcome.us folks, and others have actually launched calls for proposals around broadening engagement and in welcoming and inclusion. In the university or higher education context, and for technical assistance, I know ECAR or Every Campus of Refuge is able to offer small grants to campuses that have an interest in standing up sponsorship programs. And then the National Association of System Heads, or NASH, they're also fundraising. They're actively fundraising right now and looking to disperse those funds to support systems and public campuses invested in a refugee resettlement and welcoming program on their campus. And then finally, I want to really stress something that I think we all kind of have a sense, right? And that is there is never enough private funding committed to meet the needs, or to support every worthy initiative, and there are so many of them. So how can higher education leverage some of the private funds that are available, right? So first is to engage an existing supporter or funder as a validator with other potential partners. So for example, like OSF has done this quite often and played this role quite often. At the height of COVID, we worked on what was called the Emma Lazarus campaign, which is to stand up cash assistance programs in localities across the United States to support individuals and families that were excluded from the first CARES Act. And so during this time, we joined calls with other local foundations, local government, community-based organizations to discuss strategy around fundraising, right? And to discuss how this work fits not just a national frame, but also a more local one. And this eventually we saw some funds being raised, both public and private, for that type of work. And then within the university context, I think that you have a large range of partners and networks to validate this work, right? Those who can, for example, provide advocacy and policy action like President's Alliance, but also technical assistance to help you through some of the operational hurdles, right? So I highly encourage you to join some of these coordinating calls that are already ongoing, like, APLU I know does one, NASH does one, President's Alliance, Welcome Campus Network, for example, have coordination calls where, you can come together, work through operational obstacles and share best practices that could possibly alleviate the certain funding or able to leverage each other's knowledge to support your own campus and your programs. I would also tap into community foundations and trusts, which serve as critical partners, I think, for humanitarian and disaster relief, but also hold a vast array of resources for you to build out capacity and sustain these programs on your campus. And then finally, I would call and I would count your attached foundations, your philanthropic arms, also as an ally, not just to raise for research, STEM, athletics, but really thinking through strategic ways of strengthening your community at large. So, as a brief example, there's a network dedicated to help institutions match their SDG and ESG commitments with its endowment investing goals, right? So where you can work toward having the board and financial officers work to divest from fossil fuels and invest in funds that are better for the environment. And still get a rate of return that can help your endowment. But how can we translate that kind of model or partnership, into something that is usable and wieldable for programs and individual campuses? And then the next one for end is to leverage the private commitment to pursue a matching public commitment. And this could be at a proposal stage or once you secure funds from a private funder. But an example again here, and I'll use another one from the Emma Lazarus campaign, is OSF gave a very modest amount to Denver for their cash assistance program. However, we did see Denver count on its county allies and county champions that put forth bills that injected public funds into the cash assistance programs. And so by the end of it, it became a statewide effort in Colorado and led to over $30 million in state and county funds for cash assistance. And, that platform that was created at that time, to disperse cash assistance to those that were excluded from CARES, it was actually adapted and used to disperse and provide benefits to Afghan new arrivals. So I know that there are, universities that are kickstarting conversations with their local government partners, their state partners, to think about, how they can tap into or unlock dedicated HHS or ORR funding. And I know some of you have already. I won't name the names because I'm sure that you've heard about them already. But one of the things that I will say too is sometimes these efforts will take longer to procure. We don't always, we know the government doesn't always necessarily move as quickly or meet us at the sense of urgency that we feel. But what I have heard from campus champions who have kickstarted programs or piloted programs to host and sponsor refugee students and families is that, you guys have the willpower, and it's amazing to see, to slash through, this red tape. And if you're in this for the long haul, I hope that, this slowness does not dissuade you. And I think also just keeping, leadership abreast of what you're doing, keeping to remind them that this is not just a one-off benefit or a one-time benefit, but, could really potentially help the community at large, and students as well. Now, current students and future students, I think that goes a long way. And, I know Nash, for example, has leadership buy-in support right now that they're offering. And so with some of the persistence and, so with some persistence, the Washington State University, had some obstacles in the past, but, are now looking to host 2 families on their campus and with support with a local refugee resettlement agency. So I'll close by saying that, I'm committed to sharing what resources and putting funding opportunities that I know about with you all. And so, yeah, let's just work together to build out this growing ecosystem of welcoming audiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susanna. And I think, it's really important. I think a lot of questions that have already been emerging are around resources and funding. And so it's great to have those examples and opportunities on how to leverage resources. And then also speaking a little bit to leveraging a network, we're going to actually segue over to Sarah Wilcox, who's the Deputy Director at Scholars at Risk, who will speak a little bit to how that network has been promoting access.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Susanna, and my fellow panelists. Special thanks, of course, to Rutgers Global, in particular Anu and Rick, for making this important event possible. I'm really honored to be here and to share a bit about Scholars at Risk and our approaches to what the title of the panel is Promoting Access to Opportunity. Scholars at Risk is an international network of universities and higher education institutions committed to protecting threatened academics and promoting academic freedom. The network now counts over 600 members, including Rutgers, and many of the institutions represented here today, I believe. These are small colleges, statewide university systems, and academic associations. All are active in the mission to defend academic freedom and protect colleagues at risk. I should mention that we do this in partnership with NGOs. Just as Susanna was describing, we work with NGOs, intergovernmental agencies, governments, private foundations, drawing resources and knowledge from very well-established systems and also new initiatives alike. SAR is really a community. It's a structure, perhaps a web of support of best practices and of vital resources that we've built over the last 20 years across our network, in a collective body of knowledge to respond when needed. We advocate for students and scholars facing prosecution or imprisonment. We monitor and document attacks on individuals and higher education communities. We do this through our annual Free to Think report, which many of you may have seen. We inform policymaking, particularly in Europe, where an initiative called Inspire Europe actively seeks transnational cooperation to support researchers at risk and to develop more resources. In what we call our protection work, we provide direct services to threatened scholars seeking to pursue their academic work in safety. And the intention of the SAR network here is to replicate, however possible, the structures and models that work, to create visiting academic positions, often through fellowships or direct university funding, drawing on resources that Susanna mentioned, so that scholars may resume their academic work and reestablish their academic connections. Most often, these opportunities are visiting academic positions at universities and colleges, like many of your own, where scholars may do their research, they may teach, they may publish their work, and above all, they may expand their networks. This model has helped thousands of scholars over the last 20 years with IIE's Scholar Rescue Fund, SAR members, and a growing number of programs around the world. The good news is that new initiatives to provide this direct support are growing here in the US, as we all see in our partnership here today. In the last 20 years, US colleges and universities have opened up their doors independently, now in growing number in partnerships. Institutions are doing the same across the Middle East, across universities in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is certainly a very global effort. And in increasing numbers, European governments are establishing now national level initiatives to infuse their higher education systems with the resources that are needed to really provide sustained support for threatened scholars, for researchers, and for students. So perhaps just as important in all of this is that these national level initiatives, which we are lacking here in the US to some extent, they do certainly demonstrate a public commitment to this global effort. And I think that's where some of the discrepancy may lie. Through all of this progress, though, and in the ever-growing landscape of new programs, our model has been tested, of course, by the sheer number of scholars seeking support. With the crisis in Afghanistan, of course, in Ukraine, Yemen, Ethiopia, Myanmar, sadly, the list goes on and on. We've seen applications to Scholars at Risk more than quadruple our typical experience. This is not to mention the even greater numbers of students affected around the world, and we're not providing direct services to those students. These conflicts bring our work into, of course, stark relief. It's demanding resources on a scale far beyond the needs of an individual scholar. But this is also not to diminish the individual scholar from, say, China, Hong Kong, Turkey, Venezuela, Belarus, Iran, Zimbabwe. Again, the list sadly goes on and on, where the work and lives of many scholars may be threatened not by war, but by those in political power. Yet with each crisis, with each individual scholar we respond to, we do have to adapt. No one case is alike. In each crisis, whether acute, chronic, long-standing, each brings new challenges. In Afghanistan, there was no sort of how-to guide to evacuate colleagues in the frightening chaos. And now that Afghan colleagues are reaching our universities, however slowly, and however frustratingly slowly, those left behind are still obviously in grave danger. We're hearing from scholars still very much in hiding, and the academic space in the country is shrinking by day. We know too that while an opportunity may await them at Rutgers, as one of our commentators mentioned earlier today, many Afghans were still waiting for the visa process to move forward. They may not be able to cross into Pakistan or Iran. And if they do reach an embassy, again, their visa may be delayed, denied. And this, of course, is just building on the untold stress of uncertainty. Similarly, Ukrainian scholars are reporting their inability to, or in some cases, their unwillingness to leave, but they are nonetheless reporting the need to continue their work no matter the circumstances. And I know we're all hearing these same stories. We're hearing increasing demands for remote resources and remote affiliations. And this is definitely an area that has much room for growth. We have a number of SAR network members in Canada and the US, for example, who are navigating sort of the practicalities and in many cases the impracticalities of, say, transferring funds, sustaining scholars in situ. So there are developing models that we hope to share coming forward, and we invite any suggestions from you all as well. So if there's anything the COVID experience, I would say, can teach us in this space, it's that we are indeed connected, however imperfectly, through technology, and we must seek new and innovative ways to create more opportunities for those who can't leave family behind, for instance, for those whose visa applications are denied, or for those who simply can't cross international borders. And considering all these challenges, it would be disingenuous to say that this is a fine-tuned machine. It can't be. The success of any scholar who finds their host institution is really the result of their individual agency, of individual scholars across all corners of our global community, who in the face of indescribable stress and pressure want nothing more than a safe place to pursue their work. And the success of an individual scholar would, of course, not be possible without the individual champions across all corners of a local community who find and secure the resources to form a structure of support, be they academic structures, housing, navigating visa, status confusion, securing the funds to provide a salary, mental health resources, access to local schools, and more. Individual champions come from all imaginable places. We're a scrappy bunch as we try to do this as best we can for those we're supporting. But as we all know, this is not a selfless endeavor. The individual champions that you all may be, including a wider network beyond this call here, of course, is that we do this for something in return, in fact. We do want to learn from our displaced colleagues and our students, and we want to build a global community with colleagues we may not otherwise have the opportunity to work with. So with that, I invite you to continue the conversation with us if you're interested. We want to hear from you about your experience, how we can work together. Please be in touch. I'll extend my contact information in the chat, and I look forward to the continued conversation. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for sharing about the work that Scholars at Risk has been doing and continues to do. Now I'm going to turn it over to Arzo Koistani, who is the Managing Director of Afghan Futures Fund, who's going to share about the work that they have been doing to promote access and mobilize resources and networks. Arzo, over to you.
Thank you, Laura, so much. Thank you to Rick for this opportunity, and for Anu, and it's really nice to see so many familiar faces here. I think I'll take the opportunity during this session to kind of showcase how bringing the different resources that Sarah and Susanna talked about of funding partners and kind of showing a case study and how that was done. So just by way of background, my name is Arzo and I'm managing the Afghan Future Fund. The Afghan Future Fund really came together as a result of the crisis and following the crisis in Afghanistan in August of 2021. Prior to the crisis, Yalda Hakim and I were running the Yalda Hakim Foundation, which was focused on providing higher education opportunities to young women in Afghanistan, both in Afghanistan, but also by providing scholarships for them to study abroad, such as Oxford University and Georgetown in Doha. When the crisis happened in August, we had about 3 scholars in Afghanistan that reached out and said, what do we do now? There's really nowhere for us to go, and there's definitely no future for us to hear. And this was really our impetus in getting involved in evacuation and trying to get students out to a safe third country. We managed to evacuate our scholars onto Albania and their families where they were safe. They were able to continue their education remotely at the American University of Afghanistan. But we quickly realized that there's several hundred other American University of Afghanistan students remaining. And unfortunately, with the Taliban coming in, their campus was turned into the second headquarters in the country. So we recognize the grave risks that they were facing. And a mix of leveraging personal relationships and trying to start a process, we committed to evacuating about 200 American University of Afghanistan students over to Iraq. Unfortunately, in the region, there weren't many countries that had opened up their doors to just anyone at risk or students in particular. But the leadership of Iraq, they were willing to open up their doors and take these students in until they could find a more permanent solution. And so we brought about 110 American University of Afghanistan students to Iraq, always as meant to be as a more temporary solution until we can find them pathways, more permanent pathways into the US or other countries. And while we brought in the students to American University of Iraq and Soleimani, we recognized very quickly that there were it was a bit of the students had become a bit fragmented, and they were in various third countries, a major one being at AUCA, the American University of Central Asia in Bishkek. And it turned out that we were both, this speaks to when this crisis happened, there was no system in place. So although there were many of us doing the same kind of work, we were also approaching the same type of donors and the same type of sponsors for funding and for resources and for university placements. And these sponsors and donors said very quickly, we're receiving the same kind of requests from multiple different institutions. Why don't all of you sit together and come up with a more programmatic approach of how you can resettle, or of how these Afghan students can be resettled more permanently? And so with that, we came together with a number of colleagues and partners with the American University of Central Asia in Bishkek, where they were hosting upwards of 300 Afghan students, a mix of just Afghan students, but also AUAF students. And together we started reaching out to a number of universities in the US to see what the process would be for hosting them. And thanks to institutions such as President's Alliance, to Laura, to Rick, to Barney at APLU for giving us a platform and a way to address this, the opportunities we were trying to create for students. We recognized very, very early on that US universities at the time were very receptive to accepting students. And so through this, we were able to secure a number of placements from various universities across the U.S. I see many of them on the call now. And so with that, we were able to create a program where we had the universities that had agreed to take in a certain number of students, and we had donors that had offered to provide generously funding this program. And so with that coming together, it was a matter of then creating a process to bring these students in. And so now what we've been working on is with various agencies within the US government to try to find pathways for the students to come to the US. The process is still ongoing, but we do hope that we can bring in about 250 students to the US by the fall of 2022. And I think this is one of those cases where everything that we were doing, it's one of those building the plane as you're flying it. As Susanna said, we didn't, there is no central place of where these resources are. So it's about leveraging personal relationships and reaching out. There was no central place of, which universities are willing to take Afghan students. So it was just holding as many calls as we can, securing as many spots as we can. But I think this is a case study in trying to now centralize a lot of the lessons that we've learned through this process, and having a recognition for who are the donors and who are the sponsors that are willing to help. And I think it also speaks to the case that a lot of times we, at least in my understanding, is that the long-term solution always seems to be the US or Canada, but there are third countries that can host students. And instead of them being in a refugee camp or having idle situation where they're not doing anything, you can, Iraq and Bishkek shows that you can have an environment where they can continue their education until more permanent solutions are identified. So we're hoping that this is a model that can be replicated because, Afghanistan crisis is barely over and Ukraine has started. And unfortunately, there probably will be other crises. So I think this is a model that we would like to take and see how we can replicate, and the relationships that we've built, the universities that have been so generous, to see if this can become an annual program of accepting students. So that is an overview of our program. It's still very much a work in progress, and we definitely welcome suggestions from those that have been doing this, and really looking forward to cementing the partnerships that we've made, and hopefully in another session we can share the success of the program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arzo. And last but certainly not least, I'm happy to turn it over to Jennifer Dyer, who is the Senior Technical Manager at Education Above All, who's going to share about the work that they've been doing to mobilize resources and create opportunities. Jennifer, over to you.
Hi there. Yeah, my name's Jennifer Dyer. And can you see my slides okay? Just the slide or everything?
We can see the bottom slides in addition to the main slide.
Oh, that's not good. Okay. Okay. That's not good. Anyway, well, it's really nice to be here. And we're kind of a different group of people. I work as a senior technical manager at Elfacora, and we were founded from Elfacora, and we were founded in 2009 by Her Highness Sheikh Moza bin Nasser. And since then, Elfacora has been moved under the umbrella of Education Above All. So I think that's not I've kind of updated my slides, so maybe just keep me. So anyway, so then the thing is we talk a lot about access, and the thing is we started in Gaza in 2009, and then we started our flagship program, which is called Dynamic Futures. And mostly we've worked with refugees and internally displaced persons, and we have basically started moving out towards other countries, Turkey, Syria, and if our numbers, like we've given 7,403 scholarships, and that's pretty exciting. But at the same time, I always feel that there's just something more that we need to offer. So with our Qatar Scholarship Program, when you talk about access to opportunity for the most marginalized refugees, now I'm coming from an international perspective, but when we talk about access to opportunity, the first thing it starts out with is focusing on the pre-scholarship, and you're campaigning to the beneficiary oriented and vetting universities and doing a hands-on approach, because it's the easiest part is actually for us, the easiest part is to give the scholarship. Okay, so when we say over 7,000 scholarships, the easy part is that, but there's just there's so much more to giving a scholarship than that. And first of all, though funding is important, we found out as we started growing that since not all refugees can come to America or to Canada, a lot of them are in Jordan, they're in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, many different areas. And the reality is they are basically, this is their reality. They're staying in their host country. We kept thinking that they were going to be able to go home, but generally speaking, they don't do that. So we developed a program called the Qatar Connection, which we created to connect students with one another and to Qatar. So through the activities like internships, exchanges, this really helped them stop feeling stateless. Because the thing is that when you talk about, access, you have to think about what are you working with? You're working with young people who feel that they don't have a home, and as soon as university finishes, then where do they belong? Because a lot of times they're marginalized in their host country, because there's a lot of lack of cohesion or different things like that. So our Qatar Connection program, actually, we consider it taking it one level up above just the monetary, which is connecting the students to be able to gain access to, for example, like Al Jazeera. And we had classes for some of them for mobile journalism, or Qatar National Library. So the reason I'm saying this is because building funding is important, but beyond that is being able to connect countries, develop countries with the students and raising awareness of that. So for me, I'm constantly trying to figure out how can I mobilize funding with my country-centric concept, which is Qatar Connection and Qatar Scholarship. So basically, I have to work in trying to figure out what do other funders, what do other countries, what are they interested in? And so we have to bring everybody around in hope for humanity and to belonging. So by saying that, so what I would do is say, I have, like, for example, a program right now, and this one country's been running their scholarship program for decades. And I'm like, hey, we need to mobilize our resources and put co-funding together to work with this group of students. And we need to make them feel, we need to work at the reality of getting there, to having them not feel stateless. Because even though we can't bring them to Qatar necessarily or to America necessarily, the one thing we can do is bring the countries to them. So we can harness what's already existing so they don't feel stateless. And this is like, because the saying is it takes a village, but their village is gone, right? But it takes a nation reaching out to help them feel a sense of belongingness. And it also proves that nations can work together for their sake so there can be hope. And to me, that's the most important thing, is to be able to ensure that that what we're working with is a very important, and they are part of this. Am I still here?
You're still here. We're
okay.
here.
Okay. So I know we keep talking. I know we're not. I know that a lot of this is about having resources mobilized, in America and Canada, but the reality is not everybody gets to come. So what can countries do to help these young people so they don't think we forgot them, even if we can't bring them to America or to Canada or to the UK? So we're constantly working with universities. We're constantly bringing co-funding together, mobilizing resources, but we don't stop there. We let them know that even after they graduate, they're going to be part of a network that is transnational. And to me, that brings a lot of hope and makes them feel important.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you to all our panelists. Just a couple of questions for you all is I've loved hearing about the work you all have been doing to really promote and create opportunities. But I'm also hearing that from all of our discussions today, just the pure increase in volume and demand. So I was wondering if any of you could speak to a little bit of where you see opportunities to really scale the mobilization that you've already done.
I'm happy to share our experience. I think someone once said that you have to look at it as one person at a time, because the problem is so enormous, and even our program of bringing 250 students, it seems large, but when you have thousands in the waiting line, it does seem very daunting. So I think one of the lessons that we learned is that third countries is an option, and it's a much more cost-effective option than, for example, a $50,000 a year university price tag in the US. So if there is a way for students to continue their education in third countries and they see the benefit of having these students there, I think that is one way that we can expand this. The second one is the kind of the partnership that we've built with the universities in the US. It's not necessarily asking for full scholarships, but asking for a reduction in tuition or a reduction in certain fees. And if we're able to provide at least the kind of the starting budget for the students to come in, which may be just a third of the tuition of what the universities charge, I think that's another way to mobilize it, because it doesn't put all of the pressure on the universities of figuring it out, and we can come in with not all of the funding, but some of it, that they can comfortably be able to take in 250 students versus just 20 students. So I think that's one of the lessons that we've learned, trying to leverage as much as possible, and then also trying to see how third countries can be utilized.
I think also from my experience too, is just higher education is expensive, and that's just the reality. So I find by bringing more people together, more funders together, it just takes the sting out of it, So it's kind of like you just try to figure out what do you want? What do you want? What's good for your program? Try to put it together. Can we get 3 people for this program and do 100 or 1,000 kids, or students. So, a lot of times it's just rallying people around something that they believe in and helping with the co-funding and making sure that, because every funder has their own agenda, they have their own narrative, communications wise. And so this really helps. If we can figure that out, then we can bring our funding together, which really makes a big difference. And that's one of the main reasons we've been able to award so many scholarships, to be honest.
And I would just reflect as well on all of that. Alan Goodman mentioned this becoming the DNA of an institution. And I think if that is something that can be promoted and sort of developed across every higher education institution, and it doesn't have to be hosting, 50 scholars or students at a time. I mean, this is very much, as Arzo was saying, it's very much a case-by-case, person-by-person approach. And I don't think there's no machine, again, that you can sort of attach to this. Every case is different, but there are lessons learned that allow us to sort of put the structures in place. And I think if that's replicated across every institution, the dream is that every university would host, every college would host a student or a scholar. That would certainly address a massive need. So I think one person at a time is the way to approach it, while thinking how best to set the structures up for future as well.
And I'll add one little piece of that. There are over 4,000 private and public higher education institutions in the United States right now, which is quite a lot, right? And if, the one thing that I hear Dia and now Nash kind of speak about on just one family at a time. If, for example, this family is just one family of five people, or you take on a cohort of 5 students or scholars, if you really think about it, just that's 20,000 individuals that can be protected and receive education and or have the integration and welcoming that it really needs. So yeah, I always love this map. She has this map of resettlement agencies overlaid with all the institutions across the US, and it like all the bubbles that just pop up, and in areas where there could be so much potential for mobility, or sorry, labor pathways and everything else. Like, I think it's just amazing to see.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time sharing what you have already been doing to promote access to opportunities. I hear kind of three big themes emerging. One is just to continue to provide and expand multiple pathways, both multiple pathways to get to the US higher ed, but also expanding our ideas of geographies and where people can access higher ed. I'm here to call for continued networking and coordination amongst institutions and organizations, especially when it comes to access and opportunities for students. And then thirdly, just engagement and investment from entire communities and pooling and bringing investors together. So thank you all. And I think this is a great transition into from access to how we support and structures to support scholars and students moving forward.